Thanks for stopping in to the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Bryan Gardner. He's in the house with me, the head athletic trainer and physical therapist for USA Rugby 7's. That's right, the Olympic team. He's just coming back from Paris and we're going to talk all about it. But before we begin, know that November 3rd, I'm going to be hosting a CEU workshop called Posture-Based Soft Tissue Mobilization. We're going to look at how just by doing a little soft tissue we can affect structural alignment and posture, and how you can target issues based on a person's foot pressure. If you want more information, just go to rockysnyder.com, and there's a whole bunch of insight in there. It's CEUs for athletic trainers, physical therapists, chiropractors, personal trainers, strength coaches. Everybody gets units for it. So that's November 3rd, rockysnyder.com. Check it out. It'll be an in-person workshop. If you want education on a different level, maybe consider Setanta College. They have programs for performance coaching, sports injuries, and return to performance management. They've got master's programs in applied sports biomechanics and movement science, as well as applied sport and exercise psychology. Just go to setantacollege.com, enter in RS10, RS10 for 10% off your tuition today. While you're at it, head over to Instagram, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and enjoy the show. Oh, Bryan, thanks for coming on, Zelos. I mean, we've had a few previous guests that I know were over at the Olympics this summer, but you're on the list now too. You just got back working with the rugby, the 7's over there, and I got to say it's one of the most fun, or in terms of spectator sports. I love the 7's. So before we get underway, welcome to Zelos.
Well, I appreciate you having me. This is an honor for me to get on and kind of talk about what I do, and then just 7's and rugby in general. I know with the Olympics being in LA, the 7's doing pretty well this past Olympics, especially the women's side. Yeah, I'm excited. I appreciate you having me on.
You know, we should just get it over and done with in terms of what the rugby 7's are. For those that aren't familiar, that maybe they didn't watch the Olympics, but this is a fast-paced version of traditional rugby. 7 minutes and a smaller team going against each other. Can you give us the rundown of what rugby 7's is like?
Yeah, so rugby 7's, like you said, is 2 7-minute halves, split up by a 2-minute halftime. So, and it's 7v7, and it's on the same size rugby pitch, which makes a lot of space comparative to the traditional 15s, where it's a lot longer, a lot more like tactical. I'm also want to just say I'm not a rugby coach, so the tactical side, but rugby 7's is a very unique sport. It's fast. You need to be very fit, and there's high collisions. So it's just yeah, go until the time runs out. And if time runs out, you still can keep playing, which is another interesting thing, where it's not over until the ball's kicked out or there's a turnover and that kind of stuff. So it's super fun to watch. It's really fun to also work in. But I've actually never played, so I can't attest to the actual physical demands, but I can give you it via the research or what the guys kind of tell me how they feel after it, to be honest. So
I hear you. Yeah, and that is, I mean, we won't get too deep into the rugby world, but the culture is so amazing. And what I mean by that is, like, usually two teams, opponents going against each other, you know, just going all out. And then they go their separate ways with most games, most sports. But when it comes to rugby, they are trying to kill each other when the clock is ticking. But as soon as it's over, it's like family members getting together for a family reunion and the party begins then. It's just the most remarkable thing. But I don't want to get into that. I want to get into your career path. You're the head athletic trainer for USA Rugby 7's. You're also a physical therapist. Give us the lowdown, like this, I call it the superhero origin story. How did you start out? What was it? What was the major injury you sustained that you wanted to be an athletic trainer and physical therapist? Because it had to kind of, most of the time it's like that.
To be honest, I never had a very serious injury. I I was more of the seeker of performance when it came to my background. I played baseball in high school and college, in undergrad. So, and just my want to be the best, I did my own research, and that's kind of how I fell in. I started as exercise science. I went to Ithaca College in Central New York. Um, so I started in exercise science, and then I really wanted to work in sort of the athletic population. So they had an athletic training program, so I transferred over there. I played baseball for 3 years and football for two. Was fortunate enough to play professional baseball. And then that's kind of what led me to that. Ended up finishing my degree at Ithaca during my playing days, and then just kind of transferred over to athletic training, where I worked. My first job was in a high school at Mount Vernon High School, which is near New York City. Which they were very good in sports. We were really good in basketball. We were state champs, Federation state champs, ranked in the nation. And then our track team was very good. We won nationals in indoor 4x100. So we had a lot of good experiences that way. And I think having done my research from a performance side for my personal self, I felt very prepared being my first job. And then I ended up deciding to going back to school because I really wanted to work in collegiate athletics at that point in my career. So I went and got my master's degree in kinesiology at Cortland State, which is another small central New York school. Working football, primarily baseball, just with my background. And then graduated, went to Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, and
RIT, sure.
yeah, RIT. Worked men's and women's hockey. I was their head strength coach, so kind of a quick pivot from medical to strength and conditioning. I also kind of subletted some hours just as an athletic trainer for the school. So yeah, kind of worked in two different roles. And
I'm
when I
curious though, because you're head athletic trainer for Rugby 7's here. So were you grandfathered in? Because these days you've got to get your master's, and some even have their doctorate in athletic training. But were you ATC after you got your master's in kinesiology? How did that all pan out?
So I sat for my AT license in 2010. So they just transitioned over the masters, I believe, in 2020. I believe, I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure. But yeah, so I was already an athletic trainer. I had my CSCS, going through all of this, and I kind of did some part-time like performance training for just clients, and then like a private facility while working in different various roles that I had mentioned previously. So I had kind
Yeah.
of like I just said yes. I was a very big into just kind of just absorbing as much experience as I could, whether it was in the private sector, collegiate sector. Um, so yeah, it was just kind of my nature just to try to just become similar to my playing career, the best of what I could be version of myself when it came to just a clinician. So yeah, that's brings me back to like working at RIT. I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of pro NHL players kind of be training out of the facility. So allowed me to kind of make connections that way, which kind of led me to my next role. I ended up getting hired as an assistant athletic trainer with the Buffalo Sabres, which was obviously a very big jump from being at a Division I school, which was a dream come true. It was nice because I was able to kind of hop in. It was learn on the fly, especially in NHL is a little bit different than working in collegiate hockey. But yeah, I mean, then was
How
fortunate enough to
so?
then I mean, that's just the sure travel. So as a head strength coach, I didn't travel with the team. I also wasn't on the bench. Just as an athletic trainer, I more work primarily with like lacrosse and baseball and the not like the Division III sports that were there. They just needed help with the coverage, and then I was like primarily the men's and women's hockey, which is Division I at RIT. So it was kind of like another switch in my sort of trajectory of like going from athletic training to strength and conditioning back into athletic training. I made another switch to the strength side. So I did a year with the Sabres, and then I was then moved back to the AHL team to help with athletic training. I made just went down to their minor league team, and then
That's the Americans, Rochester Americans.
correct.
Yeah,
And
and
then
that's where the association between Rochester and the Sabres come in. We've had Don Dudley on, who's a chiropractor
oh
with the
yeah, yep,
Sabres. You know
yep.
Don?
Oh, I know
Yeah.
him very
So
well.
yeah, so good guy. Great to talk to a chiropractor, especially when it comes to HL and NHL. So, but I was wondering what it was, and of course, it's the Americans. You guys, yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, yeah. So I ended up being just a 1 year as an athletic trainer with the team, and then I switched over. We had a few staff members leave. I switched over to kind of as an assistant strength coach. So again, another switch into sort of a role. But I kind of was put in charge of all of our sports science. So I handled all of our heart rate data, our GPS data, all the stuff that we like wanted to collect from an objective, because I thought that would allow me again trying to just make myself as knowledgeable in a lot of different realms as possible.
And so, what was the most valuable aspect of that in delving into the sports science? Like today, when you look back that experience, what are the number one things that pop up and say, "Oh, I'm really glad I did that because now I can utilize that information here."
So it allowed me to kind of understand terminology. Also, with we used catapult, but
Yeah.
we indoors it wasn't technically GPS. It was just accelerometer and gyroscope. So it allowed me to kind of understand what we were collecting a little bit more, which in my current role allowed me that we use stat sports with USA Rugby, but it allowed me to kind of just be able to talk the same language with our strength coach when it came to metrics. It may not be the same from running to skating, but it still allowed me to have a good sort of foundation to kind of understand to help build, whether it was return to play or help with planning when it came to weekly planning or even just like a training block. So that, I mean,
Love it.
then and allowed me to kind of utilize more of the objective side in my own sort of practice as a rehab practitioner. Just using
For
that from a
example,
return to play. So using it for when I'm returning guys back to running from either a hamstring strain or they have an ACL, or like we had a couple other injuries that we kind of had long term that kind of ended up using sort of that kind of data to help make sure that we were making the right call or pulling back when we needed to. So yeah, just a lot of the wearables that we know today. Just that kind of experience gave me a little bit more insight. Also having sort of a mentor from the Sabres kind of mentor me with how to use like data visualization, that kind of stuff. So it allowed me to kind of, again, just add another tool to my toolbox. So that's kind of one of the reasons why that taking that sort of switch again from AT to more of the strength role, it just allowed me to kind of again broaden my sort of knowledge base. Yeah, and then it came down to we hit COVID. I decided to go back to PT school.
nice.
In 2020, started that. So did a 3-year PT degree at Nazareth College, now Nazareth University. They made a switch.
Where are they out of?
It's in Rochester, New York. So I
Okay.
kind of stayed local. Was fortunate enough to kind of take a graduate assistantship while doing PT school with the athletic training department there. And that's kind of how I fell into rugby.
Ah,
There was our head athletic trainer, the head athletic trainer there was looking for someone to help offload rugby, just because of the demand. It was their biggest sport. They had just started actually, so they didn't have enough people to kind of help manage sort of like that side of it. So
lacrosse was not their biggest sport. Lacrosse
well,
wasn't.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Lacrosse was big, hockey's big. It was just
Okay.
more of they had just started it and they hadn't gotten a new position. So that instead of hiring a full-time staff, they made it so that I was able to kind of work as a GA, which was nice because it obviously helps with some of the private school. It helps with that.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, then so I got the experience with rugby there, and it was awesome. I did that, and then kind of before I took this current job, they had hired me on as like their like an assistant coach, but I was primarily there for like the strength and speed side of things, like on field speed development. So I didn't in all the conditioning side of it, just with my background in strength and conditioning. So I got a little bit of like the coaching side, just on field stuff. And then
Hmm.
yeah, this job came about, and then moved to Chula Vista, where now like knowing that that just qualified for the Olympics, they were looking for a head like physio or AT. So yeah, just made it through the process, and then did a full season with them on the series, doing some international traveling, which was the first time for me, and then obviously the Olympics being my first one. So yeah, that kind of brings me
Okay.
to full circle.
Married and kids. What's your what?
I have a 5-year-old son. Yeah. Not current. Well, was married, not anymore.
Got it. Got it. And not to pry too much, but how was the traveling with all of that? You're speaking international traveling, and I'm sure you're gone quite a bit. That puts a strain on things, to say the least.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was not, it was, so my family lived in New York while I lived in Colorado, or I mean, in California. So it was, we did that because of the amount of travel, and
Yeah.
not knowing sort of like what was kind of going to be expected of me, just kind of a new position, that kind of stuff. So that was definitely the hardest part of the job, was the travel and being away from family. But
That's a
yeah, I
pretty
mean,
common occurrence. I mean, just for the listening audience, say if you're thinking, oh, this is, the romantic side of working with a professional team, uh, that also incorporates travel and being away from people. So things to consider. But it's great that your pursuit of knowledge has been far and wide. Uh, and I mean, to go back and get your DPT,
yes,
right?
yep, yeah, DPT,
And
yeah, I mean, that's to go on that. The reason why I went back to school was to help um, increase my knowledge base in the medical side. So like I had said before, like I had such a broad generalist approach, and then I had a mentor say, you at some point you should think about specializing. So in my head, it was like, okay, I really enjoy that sort of puzzle of return to play with my medical side, my strength side, and then my like sports science side.
so, what
Yeah,
is it
so just
about return to performance that you really dig? What is it about return to performance?
I just find it interesting with like being a big puzzle, and just not everything's the same, and being able to kind of manipulate sort of everything to kind of get to the common goal of returning to play better than they were before. That's kind of like what I look at, sort of my rehab philosophy is I use injury as an opportunity to not only return them back to the lineup or the court or whatever sport that I may be working. It's about making them better, and having them to feel like they're succeeding in sort of the rehab process instead of just getting through it.
I love it. It sounds
So,
like we're on the same page with that. I tell people if they ask me what I do, I'm just a puzzle master. I like solving puzzles, and I love getting people back to where they would be or where they haven't been before and beyond. So let's talk about rugby for a second in regards to injuries. Give me the top three most common injuries when it comes to rugby sevens. What do you see?
um, hamstring strains, the amount of volume that they do, not only in like during matches, but the high speed volume. Concussions are pretty frequent just with the amount of collisions that they have. Even though there's only 7 guys, like we had on a roster, playing at a time, I had a roster size of 26. So there was, and then give or take a few more, if they were in camp. And then I would say either ACL or MCL. We had a few with MCLs this year. Yeah, I mean, that's we had a few shoulders, but from those perspectives, I would say definitely hamstrings, or soft tissue, like whether it's calf or hamstring. So yeah.
And with these top three, I mean, and your broad background with strength conditioning, athletic training, physical therapy, um, what components do you pull from these disciplines to formulate a plan? Now, of course, every athlete's going to be different, and the reasoning behind one person's hamstring pull could be completely different than somebody else's, depending upon their movement patterns, their injury history, density of tissue, a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, what? How do you approach the situation? I guess is my question.
Um, I approach it as is what they can do. I'm not. I don't kind of. I look at it from a you can do something. So what if we're looking at sort of soft tissue injuries specifically? If we can do any sort of regression when it comes to running, we're going to do that. We're going to mimic similar sort of physiological adaptations that we're doing in practice and try to mimic it. Even if it comes down to like dribbling, if we can get into some sort of dribbling, we're going to be running pretty quickly. That's just sort of my sort of philosophy is I like to kind of start with a lot quicker than some practitioners because I know that these guys are trying to make a roster. I'm doing it safely, obviously, and respecting that, but also knowing that pushing it is also what they want to do as well. I mean, these guys are getting paid to do this, so it allows us to kind of both be on the same page. I also allow athlete input too. If we're trying to get them back, like if they're willing to do certain things or if they don't like doing certain things, that allows me to kind of like create a program that they're going to just buy into and it allows them to, I guess, have it be their own and individualize it themselves. So they feel like they're also um, feeling like it's individualized because not everybody likes to do RDLs or people that don't like to axial load aren't going to want a back squat. So I try to make it so that they're also um, incorporated. And I think another thing that I found that was very good, worked well for me was I also involved in long-term rehabs was the coaching staff, just to kind of set the expectations of where we are. And this was a joint meeting with the coach, the athlete, and myself, just to allow that everybody was on the same page, which in a few cases was really helpful because it allowed us to kind of either take it a little bit slower or if we really needed to get, say, we're up for the Olympics, is push it along a little bit quicker. Again, still respecting sort of the healing process, but also knowing that the risks that they may endure if we kind of push it a little bit. So it allowed myself to kind of blend the art and the science side of it, but also allow me to kind of build that buy-in with athletes, knowing that I was new to the program this year, and new to the coaching staff as well.
And do you serve as an adjunct kind of S&C coach as well? As I mean, I know you carry over with your role, and there's no necessarily passing of a baton, like a demarcation of I'm done with you. Here you go to this person. It's flowing through. But are you one of the S&C coaches, or you look at yourself like that?
I did get in with during the gym sessions. Like we never, when we had rehabs, I was in the gym with them during our team lifts. So, and having that collaboration with our head S&C, because it was just myself and him, to start off with, and we added a few more, sort of help during the Olympic block. But during the season, it was just myself and him. So he knew I had a background in strength and conditioning. So we kind of collaborated a lot when it was that kind of it, and he respected my sort of opinion, and I wasn't there to just take over sort of thing. It was more of like, you do the guys that are the healthy. I'm just there if you need an extra set of hands. Like when we ended up getting force plates, like I ended up helping run them. And he utilized me because we started doing jump testing weekly. We started implementing mid thigh pull. So we kind of just used each other to kind of make sure we were both on the same page. And then I was more in charge of the guys that were modified with rehab. But also, if I had to go in and take someone from a rehab perspective, or he had to do something that may involve like the GPS, like he was okay with me helping or facilitating that. We had one instance where I forget what we were doing, but I ended up running the gym session and he was off doing something with the coaching staff. So yeah, I mean, it allowed us to kind of work in harmony that way. And it worked out really well because it was like, as soon as I was to the point where we were getting into more of like the end stage sort of rehab, it was like, he's a rugby guy, like he played rugby, grew up playing rugby, had worked in rugby, most of his career. So once it became more the rugby side of it, I kind of handed off to that side of it. So it was a very good relationship. And then we both just kind of had input when it came to like the planning side of it, which was nice. We would sit down and kind of go through that, whether we were on the road or kind of building for that current block of training. So yeah, I mean, it was good.
Oh, I can imagine. It's just and always good to have more hands in the gym, more eyes, and so on. So when it comes to main lifts, you had mentioned some guys don't want to back squat. You want to try and individualize the programs and so on. And maybe not the lifts themselves, but just conditioning. Are you building in resiliency? I'm just thinking the hamstring strains you're speaking of. It's um, pretty common injury site, and I wonder how much we train on the pitch in terms of multi-directional, including retro or reverse runs, cuts, lateral kind of movements, and like how much chaos, I guess this is my question, how much chaos do you feed into the tissue?
Um, I feed a lot into the tissue. I've just started going down the rabbit hole of fascia. So
Mm-hmm.
I've just and then I've had a few mentors that I've had recently that have worked either in running sports or have a lot of like experience working in running sports. Um, so
Bill
I
Parisi,
I
maybe?
provide it. Not Bill
Speed
Parisi.
school
No,
and fashion? No? Okay.
no.
Who do you have? Who are your
No.
mentors?
So Dan Howells has been a big mentor of mine. Simon Harries, I've had the pleasure of kind of having like a mentorship with him, and then Alan Murdoch has been a very good resource for me, especially from the rehab and that kind of stuff. So, and then I do have a mentor from my hockey days in Joe Collins. He's currently with the Bills. So yeah, he kind of got me onto the sort of like the loading aspect, how quick to load it, that kind of stuff. And then the other guys have kind of helped with the structuring of rehab and providing different stimuluses, but making sure that you're kind of not overloading or underloading it, trying to find that sort of sweet spot. Alan's was really good when it came to like building in sort of my coach's eye when it came to the running, whether it was change of direction, decels, that kind of stuff. And then just recently had worked with Les Spellman. He's been a super big help when it came to like the speed side of things too. So yeah, those have been kind of like the most recent ones that have been since I changed over from hockey to a field-based sport. I try to seek the best of the best when
Mhm.
it comes to sort of the rehab side of it, and even just the performance side of it.
Sweet. And any kind of like, not necessarily mind blowing nuggets, but any kind of moments where your eyes got a little wider, your jaw slackened or dropped down, you're like, holy cow, I gotta learn more about this. You mentioned fascia, but like, what is it that intrigues you about understanding fascial connections?
I just think that what we're as a, I guess, performance medical side of it, obviously we're seeing increased risks, like increased injuries continue. I think fat becomes another sort of interesting sort of, and maybe it's just a fad, but I don't think it will be a fad. I think it will be something that will be kind of trying to understand for a very long time. Um, so that's kind of where my mind has been going, is we've been doing sort of the muscle loading, the fascial lengthening when it comes to eccentrics, the high speed running and the volume that helps with resilience. But I think this might be sort of like that missing key that we may be needing to kind of dive into a little bit further to allow us to kind of help mitigate injury. And I'm not saying a high force collision and having strong fascia is going to help decrease the amount of injury that happens when it, but I think it may help make our athletes a little bit more resilient. I think that's where in my head it's done a lot of just research and kind of learning from Danny Foley, just kind of more his side of things with the stuff that they're doing at Altus. But yeah, this is more of what makes it interesting, is potential what it has to offer when it comes to building resilient athletes.
Yeah, well, I can see that. Yeah, I won't get deep into the weight room itself, but there are some traditional lifts that aren't necessarily complementing um, patterns that are going to carry over well onto the pitch. And they actually compartmentalize force production in one area without really efficient transference of force through the entire system. So we get areas of miscommunication or a lack of transference, and these areas take on a higher level of intensity, impact, and just for the most part trauma. So there's certain moves in the gym that I have moved away from, and there's others that have a tendency to help get these players a bit more resilient and efficient in their patterns. So I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing. Not that you're the S&C coach, and I know you don't want to step on toes or anything like that, but are there kind of movements that you, like you say, you want to you want to go toward, you want to lean in on, you're going to, like you mentioned, RDLs perhaps, but are there other movements that you're like, I can see how, knowing a little bit more about fascia, that I would want them to do these movements, and well, let's put these over here just on the shelf and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to I the fascial, like sort of the slings and the sort of the trains that I guess Thomas Myers talks about. It when we're playing or when we're running, like the hips are in sort of like opposite directions, whether we're in flexion and extension. We have a lot of spinal rotation, which we can go into some spinal engine theory, which I've started incorporating, and I think I have less to kind of give that sort of thing to what I've started diving into that as well, is like trying to understand that. So yeah, I mean, it comes down to understanding what you're trying to do and then do these, not saying that like squats and deadlifts and everything that doesn't make you really strong, but is it transferable? I think you have a certain extent to what you can get to. And I think then it's about how you kind of make it a little bit more specialized when it comes to like programming these sort of like, I guess, exercises. I think the tough thing is also looking at it from like what you're looking at from an adaptation standpoint too. I think a lot of people just kind of jump into like, oh, we need to do a specific exercise. If we're not sort of going towards a specific adaptation, I think we kind of lose ourselves in sort of like the complexity that may be a little bit more simple if we kind of just hone in on that sort of like adaptation that you look for.
Yeah, over analyzing isn't necessarily helpful, but same with under analyzing. Somewhere finding that sweet spot, right? Isn't that what we're all
Right,
pursuing?
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, so you're a hungry man. You are not satisfied, is what I'm getting at. You have this appetite for experience and knowledge. Where is it taking you these days? Aside from rugby sevens, where are you setting your sights? I already mentioned fashion. You've got your mentors, but you've dabbled in sports science. I mean, you are a man of all seasons. But where do you want to go?
I think I want to be able to give back to the community. I've had very good mentors throughout my career, and then I also want to be able to help mentor new practitioners. We actually have students that come and help us on a year basis with USA Rugby, which has been super insightful. I had students when I was doing my master's as well. And then I've always had when I was finishing PT school and working with the rugby team, I had an intern that was there with me to help me from the performance side. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. And then kind of the podcast that I started as well kind of helps me just wanting to be able to help educate and give sort of like what you are doing is giving sort of access to knowledge without like having to break the bank, if that makes sense.
Well,
So
it's
I
perfect segue. You're definitely a podcast hero, just being able to put that in there. So let's talk about that podcast, Reading Rehab podcast. What's that all about?
So, Reading Rehab podcast is a podcast that a couple of my classmates started when I was in PT school. We wanted to we started it as a club, is called Performance Therapy Club, but then kind of spun off of it after we graduated, and we kind of were like, we want to be able to educate people. We really enjoy kind of diving through some of the research, but um, we didn't really know how to go about it. So we were like, why not start a podcast? So the podcast is it's a weekly podcast that we kind of read just an article, kind of summarize it in the beginning, and then we kind of take sort of our experiences, and or say we have a case and we kind of go through like questioning the person that's kind of in charge of that case and shooting ideas or um, whatever we're kind of experiencing or reading at the time. The podcast is run by myself, and then Mike Brown and Pat Healy. And our experiences go from myself, who has 14 years of working as a medical practitioner, Mike, who's been working as a year as a PT, and then Pat, who just graduated PT school. So it gives us sort of like a big genre of what do I do when I first start to someone that has a little bit more experience and kind of how do we manage those sort of caseloads. And they see different people. Like obviously I worked in hockey and rugby. Mike and Pat are more like your track, cross country. So we kind of have a little bit more of a, I guess, broader basis when it comes to that sort of experience. So that's kind of what we wanted to do. And we kind of had been honestly doing this just for fun. But then it kind of became, okay, how do we kind of reach more people? How do we kind of um, give more value? Because obviously that's what people want is like, what am I taking away from this? So that's where we kind of want people to take away more clinical experience that we're getting through on a weekly basis, whether it's case related or just our experience in general.
Okay, and with the time we have remaining, I'm curious. In the last few months, what case or research paper has just kind of just giving you a shot in the arm, giving you some energy, giving you like like a holy cow moment, or what the heck was that all about?
I think about one of the more recent ones was, I guess, running. Does it cause osteoarthritis? And being able to read that, it was very interesting that a lot of people just assume like, oh, I have arthritis, it must be because of running. But in the end of the article, it kind of was inconclusive, which I know is a lot of medical of it being inconclusive, but I just thought it was very interesting because a lot of people are like, oh, I have osteoarthritis, I can't run it, or it's going to make it worse. Um, so with my colleagues' sort of background in running, they had a case where we kind of went through it, and it was like, instead of just saying people just can't run, it's about activity modification, it's about education. It comes down to what can I do to supplement if I'm not feeling good. So like that was very interesting, because you always hear, oh, my so and so said I had arthritis, I can't go, or bone on bone. Like, I think that sort of the other sort of thing is like just the way people talk about osteoarthritis, I think puts fear in people's, they can't do stuff. So again, like with my philosophy of what can we do, I think that allows me to have something to stand on when someone walks in and says, I can't, someone told me I can't run because I have osteoarthritis. And so I think that's allows me to kind of educate them a little bit further. And allows, again, them to do something that they really want to do. Again, it comes down to people come to get help because they want to do something and they can't now. So how can I help them kind of get to that point? I think that's just return to play / performance in general, whether you're going to play international rugby or if you just want to be able to run a couple miles a week. It's just something that you love and want to do.
Man, yeah, dang it, we didn't even talk about Paris and your experience with the Olympics, which maybe we're just going to have to book another time to have you back and we can talk all about Olympics, because, oh man, you gave me so many things to think about and led to more questions than we had time for. So honestly, this has been great. I love your answers. I love giving back to the community. And how do we, the Reading Rehab podcast, do you have a website, or just are you on all podcast platforms like Apple and Spotify, iTunes, and so on?
Yeah, all platforms. We're on YouTube as well. We're on Instagram. It's just Reading Rehab Pod. And then yeah, those are the ways that you can reach all of us. We're always happy to, if you want something reviewed, we're always happy for people to kind of send us articles that we'll review and kind of go through our own experiences. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how you reach us.
Right on. Well, I got my capstone coming up at the end of this year here for my master's in sports injury and return to performance. So I will submit it for your review, and you can
Awesome.
fall asleep, because I know you probably got some sleeping issues. And just start reading that, and
Oh,
you can
no.
laugh amongst your peers, and we'll have a good time with that. But no, Bryan, this has been great. I'm going to put links in the description below. But man, I'm so stoked on your path and excited for you to work with USA Rugby 7's. And honestly, it would be great to have you come back somewhere in the future, and we can talk a little bit more about your experience at the Olympic level too.
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, if anybody wants to reach me, we can put that in the show notes as well.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zelos Podcast. I want to thank Bryan for coming on, as well as US Rugby for letting this happen. Remember, November 3rd, I'll be having a CEU workshop called Posture-Based Soft Tissue Mobilization. It'll be in Santa Cruz, California. And you can check out information on rockysnyder.com. Also, while you're online, check out setantacollege.com. Remember, you can enter a code RS10 for 10% off tuition for your master's program today. Who knows, 2 years from now, you'll have that degree and the world will be your oyster. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and check out my book while you're at it, Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. We'll see you next week.